Imagine the snow-coated valley beneath Vysoka Ora erupting in blue light, unnatural, unearthly, and so precise it carves the landscape into a glowing lattice. Trees cast no shadows. Cattle collapse in silence. Time seems to pause as 1,000 perfect lines form a floating grid over the village of Pavlina. And then, just as fast, it vanishes. The echo of its presence lingers not in sound, but in the bones of those who witnessed it. Something was revealed that night. Something we were never meant to see. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. The story of Pavlina does not begin with light, but with cold. It was March 3, 1998. A Tuesday. The kind of brittle evening where breath became glass and power lines moaned in the dark. The sky was unnaturally clear, the stars sharp like needles. No one expected the blue. At precisely 11:41 p.m., the emergency siren failed. Normally tested on the first Monday of each month, it was scheduled to howl 2 days earlier. But that Monday, it had remained silent. Technicians blamed a dead relay circuit. No one thought more of it. Why would they? That night, Marta Krylova had just finished feeding her cats. She was a retired teacher, sharp-witted even in her 80s, and had lived in Pavlina all her life. Her cabin sat at the foot of the valley, within clear sight of the old telecommunications tower atop Vysoka Ora. She swears the humming started 3 minutes before the fire. A low, stomach-turning frequency that buzzed in her teeth and made the water in her glass vibrate. She looked up. What she saw next became local folklore. A blue light began to spread, not from the tower, but from the air itself. Not beams, not rays, but structure, lines connecting lines until the entire sky above the valley was mapped in a three-dimensional matrix. The light hovered, unmoving, 10 meters above the snow. The grid did not illuminate. It imposed. Each square was the same size. Perfect geometry. The animals panicked. Marta remembers her cats clawing through the floorboards, hissing, and disappearing into the cellar. Somewhere in the woods, wolves howled, not in hunger, but confusion. Trees crackled with frozen bark splitting under pressure. And then came the second sound. It was not thunder. The fire at the tower erupted like a breath being held too long. Blue turned to green, then to orange as the blaze consumed the mountaintop. Sparks cascaded down like a reversed waterfall, vanishing before they touched the ground. Pavlina went dark. Radios died. Watches stopped. A 3-minute ripple across the spine of Europe, logged by no official record. The next morning, state authorities arrived. Men in dark winter coats carrying silver cases. They sealed the station. They took no statements. Within a week, the tower was dismantled brick by brick. When the villagers asked for answers, they received none. Marta Krylova kept what she saw in silence for nearly 5 years. Not out of fear, but because she believed no one would understand. But when she found the symbol carved into the frost on her window, identical to one of the grid squares, she knew it was not over. And she was not alone. A new presence had taken root beneath the mountain. Not alive, not dead. A structure. Unfinished. By the end of March, the story should have died like any other rural rumor. But Pavlina had changed. Subtly at first. Children stopped playing in the eastern fields, claiming the ground made their feet itch. Dogs refused to bark near the old stream. And every so often, in the early morning frost, symbols appeared, not drawn by hand, not walked into snow. They just formed, overnight. Perfect lines, joined at impossible angles. Repeating grids. Marta Krylova began documenting them in a leather-bound journal. She sketched each one before they melted with the morning sun. Most were variations of squares nested within each other, but one had a sequence, 4 glyphs in a row, as if a message was being written. She showed them to the village priest. He said nothing, only crossed himself and whispered a prayer under his breath. But Marta wasn't alone in noticing. Jakub Heron, a geologist from Brno, had quietly visited the region in the spring of 1999 under the guise of rock sampling. What he was actually following were satellite anomalies, recordings of electromagnetic interference centered around Pavlina. He didn't stay at the inn. Instead, he camped near the ridge, keeping to himself, placing instruments in patterns that made little sense to the locals. They called him the Compass Man. Jakub didn't speak to Marta until the third week. He saw her sketching near the fence and stopped cold. "You've seen them too," he said, almost afraid of his own voice. That night, over cracked bread and horseradish liquor, Marta showed him her journal. Jakub's face lost color. He reached into his pack and retrieved a thermal imaging photo, taken weeks prior. The temperature distribution showed the same patterns, faint but exact, embedded beneath the snow-covered soil. Not on it, underneath it. He leaned in. "I think this valley is reacting to something not from here," he whispered. Jakub suspected the grid had not been a singular event, but a manifestation of a standing wave, one that now lingered underground, invisible but pulsing. He had seen similar anomalies only once before, in declassified data from a Cold War experiment in the Arctic Circle, where radio frequencies bent metal structures and made birds fall from the sky. Pavlina's grid, he believed, was more refined. It didn't break things. It rearranged them. Jakub's instruments began detecting strange harmonics, even during clear nights. Pulses occurred at regular intervals, every 11 hours and 42 minutes. When he plotted the peaks over time, the result was unsettling. They formed a map, a slowly expanding circuit, like a living machine unfolding beneath the mountain. The village council dismissed his findings. They told him to stop scaring the elders. That night, his campsite was burned. The villagers said it was an accident. Jakub left Pavlina the next morning without a word. He never returned. But before he vanished, he left something behind. An envelope slid under Marta's door. Inside was a cassette tape. No label. No markings. When Marta played it, the sound nearly cracked her speaker. A deep, rhythmic pulse, intermittent, mechanical. But layered under it was something else. Voices. Hundreds of them. Not speaking, not screaming, but chanting. The same 4 glyphs from the frost repeated again and again. Marta copied the tape, hiding the original under the loose floorboard of her sitting room. She wrote a letter to her niece in Prague, instructing her to come if she ever heard news of strange lights near Pavlina again. Because deep down, Marta knew this was not a warning. It was an activation. And the grid was no longer just beneath them. It was learning. It began with the radios. In mid-April, 2 weeks after Jakub Heron vanished from Pavlina, villagers reported interference across all frequencies. Local broadcasts dissolved into static, even during clear weather. More disturbingly, the interference was rhythmic. Short pulses of noise, always at intervals of 4 seconds. Then came the voice. Not in Czech. Not in any known language. The first to hear it was Radek, the village electrician, while tuning his father's war-era shortwave set. It came through faintly at first, a dry, consonant-heavy whisper that sent goosebumps up his arms. His instinct told him to shut it off, but he couldn't. The voice wasn't speaking. It was repeating, looping 4 guttural sounds that matched Marta's glyphs exactly. Radek soldered a tape outline to record it, but by the time he hit record, the signal was gone. The pattern spread. By the end of the week, 3 more families heard the same voice. One farmer claimed his tractor's onboard radio refused to turn off unless tuned to static. Another swore his car GPS began showing roads that didn't exist. A dirt path near the eastern woods, long closed due to landslides, now appeared with a name, Kara-Tyrai. Line 4. That name had never appeared on any local map. In her cabin, Marta played Jakub's tape again, slower this time. She wrote down what she heard phonetically, repeating the sounds into an old language dictionary. Nothing matched, until she cross-referenced it with Proto-Slavic root structures and came across the word seret, meaning to trace or to mark. Combined with the glyphs, the sounds formed a phrase. Mark the 4th line. Marta went pale. She pulled out a map of Pavlina Valley and overlaid Jakub's pulse timing charts. 4 parallel energy ridges, moving east to west, were visible in the data. The 4th one passed directly beneath the abandoned Orthodox chapel, long since boarded up, half swallowed by moss and stone. The village considered the chapel cursed, ever since Father Gregor had gone missing during the winter of 1983. No one went near it. Until that night. Marta approached the chapel alone. She brought a lantern, the tape, and a strip of chalk. With trembling hands, she entered through the cracked wooden doors. Dust hung in the air like ancient breath. She pressed play. The moment the tape hissed to life, the temperature dropped. The walls pulsed. A faint blue line began to glow across the chapel floor, an old tile seam that had never caught her attention before. It ran straight to the altar. She followed it. As the chanting on the tape looped again, the altar stones shifted. Underneath them, a square pit lined in iron. And in the center, embedded like circuitry in stone, was a black box, smooth, seamless, humming softly. Marta did not touch it. She recorded its presence with a disposable camera and covered the pit again, layering it with earth and salt. She whispered an old folk prayer as she left, though her hands were shaking. She didn't believe in superstition, but something down there had listened. The next morning, all animals in Pavlina's eastern pasture were dead. No blood, no signs of attack. Just collapsed, as if drained. Each one positioned unnaturally, legs aligned, eyes open, facing east. When a regional news station tried to cover it, their van broke down just 2 kilometers outside the village. Their footage was erased. A second team never returned. By May, Marta's niece in Prague received her letter. She arrived under a false name, posing as a folklore researcher. Her goal was simple: take the tape, take the journal, and take everything else Marta had collected. But the night before she was to leave, something happened. She woke to find her aunt sitting outside, barefoot in the grass, staring at the mountains. "They've mapped us," Marta whispered. "We're the pattern now." And in the distant woods behind them, the trees began to glow. Not with fire, with grid lines. The light behind the woods wasn't bright. It didn't burn or blind. It outlined. Trees became silhouettes encased in blue geometry. Their trunks formed vertical columns, while lines of horizontal light connected them at perfect intervals, like scaffolding built by invisible architects. The forest had become a structure. Marta's niece, Lenka, froze at the edge of the clearing. Her camera refused to focus. The light disrupted its sensors, casting only a fogged blur. She lowered it and turned to her aunt. But Marta was gone. In her place, only footprints in the dew. They led into the grid. Lenka followed without thinking, called forward not by panic, but by a growing pressure in her chest, a compulsion that felt not like fear, but inevitability. Each step into the glowing forest was like descending into another system. Sounds changed. Her breath no longer echoed. Even the wind seemed sliced, passing only through certain intervals, as if sound itself respected the lines. She walked for exactly 4 minutes and 22 seconds. And then the grid changed. The blue faded. A new color emerged, white. Finer, sharper, intersecting the blue. The forest became a dual lattice, humming with layered frequencies. And at its center, suspended between 2 glowing birch trees, hovered something new. A shape, roughly the size of a man's chest, hexagonal, black as obsidian but shimmering like mercury. It rotated slowly, seemingly held aloft by magnetic pressure alone. The hum rose. Lenka's vision blurred. Blood trickled from one nostril. Her ears popped. Then a voice, not spoken aloud, but pressed into her mind, said a single word. "Replicate." The lights snapped off. Darkness swallowed the forest. The lattice vanished. Birds returned, confused and screaming. And the shape, gone. Lenka collapsed, her body shaking from pressure and cold. When she crawled back to the cabin, the door was wide open. Marta's journal was gone. The tape recorder too. But on the wall above the fireplace, something, had drawn the 5th glyph in ash. A new one. One Marta never recorded. Its angles were tighter, compact, functional. Lenka stared at it, breathing shallowly. This was not a continuation. This was escalation. Back in Prague, Lenka began compiling what little data she'd salvaged. Her university credentials allowed her brief access to signal archives from 1998. Most were scrubbed, overwritten. But one fragment remained, a pattern of radio bursts near Vysoká Aura that, when translated into binary, resembled architectural blueprints. It was Jakub's grid, but layered, as if a second level had been added. She called it Grid 5. Each line represented energy flow. Each junction, a processor node. The structure was not passive. It processed, and the layout suggested it wasn't finished. Something, or someone, was still building it. But what shook Lenka most was this. The blueprint ended with coordinates. Not of Pavlina, of Bratislava. She panicked, sent emails to old contacts, attached her findings, warned them, but most never replied. One who did, an astronomer named Radim Vesely, offered a chilling possibility. Lenka, he wrote, this is not a local phenomenon. Similar grid-like light formations were seen near Arkhangelsk in 1981, and again over Corsica in 1972, always followed by electromagnetic interference, memory anomalies, and missing persons. Your Grid 5 is part of a larger pattern, one we've ignored for decades. Lenka stopped sleeping. Her reflection lagged behind her movements. Her fingernails grew faster, unnaturally. She began hearing the word again. Replicate, replicate, replicate. She left Prague 2 days later without telling anyone. The last image posted to her encrypted research board was a blurred video, only 6 seconds long. A street in Bratislava, covered in a faint lattice of white light. Static, cut to black. In Pavlina, the snow melted. Spring came late. Children returned to the fields. No one spoke of Marta. Her cabin remained empty, doors open to wind and insects. But every 11 hours and 42 minutes, a faint humming returned. Measured, mechanical, as if somewhere beneath the soil, something was expanding, line by line, node by node. Summer came to Pavlina like a ghost. It touched everything, but warmed nothing. Crops grew crooked. Bees vanished. A strange moss began to sprout at the base of fence posts, forming perfect rings. Children played less, speaking in hushed voices about invisible windows in the trees. One boy, Tomas, claimed he could see lines in the sky through his grandfather's welding mask. When asked what they looked like, he said, like instructions, like waiting. By July, the hum had become routine. Every 11 hours and 42 minutes, it resonated faintly through the ground, like the earth was exhaling. Most adults learned to ignore it, or pretended they did. But at night, more and more of them began waking at the exact moment it ended, drenched in sweat, murmuring fragments of unknown words. Something was tuning them. In the cities, Lenka's disappearance was labeled a nervous breakdown. Her encrypted notes were dismissed by officials as conspiracy ramblings. Most of her audio files were mysteriously corrupted. But one copy survived. It was forwarded to a private institute in Vienna, the Alpine Research Network, a quiet assembly of rogue scientists and ex-military signal analysts. They called it the Pavlina Resonance. One analyst, Dr. Elias Vogt, took particular interest. He was known for investigating acoustic weaponry during the Cold War, devices that used frequency to influence perception and cognition. But this wasn't human tech. The resonance wasn't chaotic. It was structured, deliberate. It operated on multiple frequency bands simultaneously, some in the subsonic range, others above human hearing. Vogt proposed something impossible. The signal wasn't a broadcast. It was a handshake, an attempt to interface. But with what? Back in Pavlina, the changes accelerated. People began to vanish. Not in groups. Not publicly. Quietly. One by one. At first, it was the drifter who slept in the barn. Then a retired postman. Then Tomas, the boy who saw the lines. His shoes were found on the roof of his family's home. No footprints. No sounds. No screams. In each case, one thing was always left behind. A symbol. Drawn in chalk, ash, or burned into the ground. Always the same fifth glyph Lenka saw in the cabin. Authorities claimed wolves. Foul play. Mountain terrain. But no bodies were ever recovered. No trace. Only the glyph. The town began to empty. Some fled without packing. Others packed but never made it out. And still, the humming continued. Dr. Vogt arrived in Pavlina under the name Emil Schreiber. He claimed to be writing a book on disappearing villages. He brought equipment, small, portable signal traps disguised as suitcases. He stayed at the abandoned inn and walked the valley with a cane fitted with a frequency sensor. What he found horrified him. The signal was stronger than reported, and it was no longer confined to pulses. It had become constant, hiding in ambient noise. Worse, there were modulations. The signal adjusted itself based on his location, as if tracking him. He tried to leave the next morning, but the road east had vanished. Literally. Not collapsed or blocked. Gone. In its place, a dense, symmetrical forest where there had been none the day before. Trees growing in perfect grid lines. Even the moss followed square patterns. He turned back, heart racing. At the edge of town, an old man in a torn coat stood motionless in the street. He wore no shoes. His eyes were white. He whispered as Voke passed. "They're building through us now." That night, Voke attempted to transmit an emergency burst on a military frequency. Before he could finish encrypting it, the room went cold. The lights flickered. His laptop screen displayed 4 characters, repeating endlessly. Mark. Trace. Replicate. Align. Then everything went dark. His recordings were lost. Only his cane remained, found months later standing upright in the exact center of Marta Krylovie's abandoned garden. Its tip glowed faintly blue. No one speaks of Pavlina anymore. Maps blur its location. Satellite images glitch when focused too closely. The last census skipped it. Tourism websites removed references to the region entirely. But those who lived nearby still feel the pressure in the soil. The rhythm. And deep beneath Vysoka Ora, beneath old stone and silent roots, the structure continues to grow. It does not need permission. It only needs pattern. By late August, satellite data analysts at a weather station near Košice began noticing anomalies. Not clouds, not storms, but symmetrical distortions in atmospheric pressure readings centered around a single point, the valley of Pavlina. What disturbed them was the shape. Not a circle. Not a spiral. A hexagon. A perfect one. They dismissed it as an error, until the pressure distortions began shifting across the map in timed intervals. Like a machine unfolding unseen panels beneath the surface. Like something breathing through layers of geography. They sent a report to the Slovak Meteorological Bureau. It was never acknowledged. 3 days later, the team's regional server went offline. Every file referencing Pavlina was deleted, and one of the analysts, an intern named Clara, disappeared during a midnight walk. Her last text read, "They're above us now." The grid turned vertical. Meanwhile, in Vienna, a signal engineer named Ansel Ritter, formerly dismissed for theorizing about cognitive interference fields, received a small, unmarked parcel in the mail. Inside was a single photograph. A wide-angle frame of a field just outside Pavlina, overlaid by an intricate grid of glowing vertical columns, forming a cube. At the center stood what resembled a monolith, a black, glass-like shard rising from the earth. No markings. No seams. Its edges shimmered like liquid. There was no sender. Ritter's hands trembled as he placed the photograph under UV light. That's when he saw the code burned into the sky. Schematic iteration 5.2 initiated. Mass alignment begins. He booked a one-way ticket to Slovakia. Pavlina was no longer listed on transport maps. Ritter took a private car, offering double the fare with no questions asked. The driver didn't speak a word the entire time. When they reached the outer ridge, the road simply ended, interrupted by fields of towering grass cut into unnaturally clean lines. As if something enormous had dragged itself across the landscape and left geometry in its wake. Ritter stepped out. The grass buzzed. He turned. The driver was gone. The car, too. No engine, no tire marks. Just emptiness, and an expanding sensation in his ears, like altitude sickness made of numbers. His wristwatch had stopped. His compass spun violently, then froze. He walked for hours through silence. The deeper he moved, the more the natural world obeyed the grid. Trees grew in mirrored formations. Insects flew only along straight lines. Even the clouds above moved in slow, shifting diagonals. And then, through the mist, he saw it. The monolith. It stood nearly 7 meters tall, buried halfway into the earth. Its surface was neither metal nor stone, but something in between, shimmering black with flowing interior movement, like molten glass inside obsidian. Shapes flickered beneath it, as though data itself was being rendered inside the object. It didn't reflect the world. It ignored it. Around it, four pylons had emerged from the ground, twisted metal-like structures shaped like tuning forks. They resonated softly, a harmonic vibration that rattled Ritter's bones. But what stole his breath was the ground beneath his feet. It was no longer soil. It was tile. Rows and rows of dark plates arranged in microscopic gridwork, pulsing faintly with embedded circuitry. He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to the surface. He heard language. Not words. Sequences. Precise, timed bursts. A message, ongoing, endless, recursive. Every 7 seconds, a short signal repeated. It matched the same audio pattern recorded by Jakub and Lenka decades earlier. Ritter began decoding it in his head, the engineer's instinct overriding fear. Align. Replicate. Seed. Build. Receive. Then he understood. The grid wasn't just communication. It was infrastructure. And the monoliths, they were nodes. But something else loomed above it all. Something not seen, not touched, but present. The feeling of observation, as though Ritter had walked into an intelligence that did not regard him as human or even alive. Just data. A potential shape to be calculated. A voice entered his mind, cold and metallic, yet impossibly vast. You are within the architecture. You are now a factor. Ritter screamed and turned to flee. But the landscape had changed. The trees were gone, replaced by towers. Silent, rising out of nothing. Each one humming, forming corridors in the grid that now extended upward, stretching into the clouds. The sky itself bore faint lines, dim white crisscrosses visible only when he blinked too long. The monolith behind him pulsed once, and then it duplicated. Another rose from the ground 10 meters away, and then another, and another. All across the valley, black spires emerged in rhythm with the pulse beneath the soil. The valley was no longer Pavlina. It was a construct, an organism, a receiving array. That night, satellites above Slovakia blinked offline for 6 seconds. Long enough to miss a regional sweep. Long enough for a signal to pass through unobserved. One signal, broadcast outward, and answered. The signal did not stop at the stratosphere. It pierced, passing through frequencies not made for sound, and ranges not made for human comprehension. It curved space by precision, not power. The message that left Pavlina was not a cry for help or a request for contact. It was confirmation. A handshake completed. A beacon authenticated. The grid was active. And someone, or something, responded. At the European Space Surveillance and Tracking Center in Darmstadt, Germany, a team of orbital telemetry analysts logged an anomaly that defied physics. At exactly 3:44 Universal Time Coordinated, 7 objects, previously untracked and origin unknown, entered Earth's thermosphere at impossible vectors. They did not burn. They did not arc. They simply appeared, inside known orbital corridors, maintaining static, triangular formation. They emitted no heat, no exhaust, only one consistent ping, every 11 minutes and 42 seconds, identical to the Pavlina resonance. The objects hovered above Eastern Europe, aligned perfectly over a single coordinate, 48.9862 degrees north, 21.3054 degrees east. Pavlina. But by then, the town had already disappeared from satellite view. Not destroyed. Erased. In the valley, Ansel Ritter awoke lying in the grass, body coated in frost. It was still August, but the air bit like February. He reached for his gear, gone. Only the ground remained, smooth and dark, like polished graphite. The monoliths surrounded him in spiraled symmetry. There were 12 now, each one humming with a voice that had no source, and yet filled his lungs with pressure. His thoughts drifted, no longer linear. Memory tangled. Time became a suggestion. The sky above shimmered in bands of pale blue. He tried to speak. His voice came out in tones, like modem signals made flesh. It horrified him. He was transmitting. His very presence had become a language the grid understood. And it replied. The glyphs returned, not carved, not drawn, but hovering in the air like glass sheets etched with light. Dozens of them, forming cascading matrices. They rotated as if alive. They spoke in pulses. His body responded involuntarily. He understood without knowing how. They were rewriting him, not biologically, structurally, turning his essence into alignment code. That's when he saw the others. Human silhouettes. Dozens of them, standing still between the monoliths. Not restrained, not harmed, but fixed. Their limbs hung loose. Their eyes glowed faintly. He recognized one. Lenka. Still alive, but no longer anchored to time or fear. Her mouth moved, but no words came. Just tone. The grid had absorbed them, mapped them, measured them. And when it finished, the monoliths pulsed red for the first time. The final glyph appeared midair, larger than the rest. Its curves were fractal, infinite within finite. Its meaning struck Ritter with the force of a falling world. Return code, human. The grid had completed its scan. Humanity was now a protocol, a designation, a sequence in a structure far larger than Earth, far older than language. Beyond the valley, in labs and defense centers across Europe, silent alerts began triggering in classified systems. Signals intercepted on deep-range antennae not used in decades. Data that spoke in the rhythm of Pavlina's grid. The transmissions didn't say, "Contact established." They said one thing: architecture synchronized, initiating replication at planetary scale. Pavlina had been a prototype, a testbed. Now, the sequence would expand. And across the world, locations that had once been dismissed as myth, mystery, or madness, Roanoke, Tunguska, the Zone of Silence in Mexico, began to hum again. Rhythms aligned. Structures activated. And skyward, the 7 silent orbiters tilted, revealing smooth black undersides. Not ships. Receivers. Ready to welcome something arriving next. In the center of the grid, Ansel Ritter took one final breath as a human. And then his body rose 3 centimeters off the ground. Frozen. Accepted. The replication had begun. The replication did not unfold as a war. There were no weapons. No fleets. No fire in the sky. The world simply began to reorder itself. It started subtly, infrastructure that began to fail without error. Elevators stalled between floors. Trains drifted into unscheduled routes. Bridges vibrated at harmonic intervals that engineers could not explain. In cities across Europe, cellular towers hummed in perfect unison every 11 hours and 42 minutes, even when disconnected from power grids. By the time scientists noticed the synchronization, it was already too late. They called it the Atlas expansion. A network of anomalous zones began to appear across the globe. They were geographically unconnected, but shared identical grid resonance signatures. The first occurred in a salt flat in northern Chile, then in the deep forests of Hokkaido, then the Sahara, then the ocean floor near the mid-Atlantic ridge, all displaying faint geometric glow beneath the surface. All aligned. And each time, after the appearance of the grid came silence. Not absence of sound, suppression. No birds. No wind. Not even internal echo. Sound bent around the grids like time had lost interest. In a decommissioned NATO data facility in northern Italy, a linguistics expert named Dr. Petra Voss was pulled from academic exile. Her specialty: pattern linguistics and pre-human symbolic systems. She was shown images of the Pavlina glyphs and asked one question: "Have you seen these before?" She laughed, then cried, because she had. The glyphs, at least their roots, were found in Mesopotamian ruins deep beneath the Euphrates, and again in Ice Age cave etchings in northern Spain, and again in magnetic silt layers beneath Lake Vostok in Antarctica, discovered during core samples. The symbols were not alien. They were pre-introduced. Markers laid down like seeds, waiting for the signal to bloom. Petra theorized the Pavlina grid was not a visitor or invader. It was a return sequence. A system designed to recognize, reconstruct, and reintegrate a forgotten network of intelligent design beneath Earth's natural layer. We were the anomaly. The overlay was the original state. And now, the Earth was being returned to its default configuration. One structure at a time. Meanwhile, above the Arctic Circle, a research vessel, the Telluris, detected something under the ice. A black vertical spike, kilometers wide, stretching from beneath the seabed into frozen abyss. Drones sent to explore it lost contact. Their final image? A glyph glowing red against ice. Accept synchronization or risk fragmentation. The crew of the Telluris vanished within 3 days. Their final logs referenced nightmares of walking into endless corridors lined with mirrors that reflected alternate versions of themselves, each with fewer human features. And back in Pavlina, if it could still be called that, the monoliths had grown. Now 44 in number, they encircled a central core. A rising black column, smooth as silence, nearly 100 meters tall. Not built. Grown. It pulsed with the rhythm of the earth. And around it stood the converted, humans once individual, now transformed into anchor points in the structure. Not dead. Not alive. Stored. Positioned with care. Held in standing suspension like thoughts waiting to be accessed. Lenka was among them. Still upright. Still blinking. Her left hand twitched in rhythm to an unseen equation. One final transmission from Pavlina broke through global noise at 4:22 Universal Time Coordinated. It was short, 3 seconds long, carried no known encryption. Just one line, not in sound, but in feeling. Atlas has awakened. The Earth is no longer the host. It is the host's memory. Then the skies above 10 global cities dimmed. Not from clouds, from shadows. Shadows of structures rising invisibly into the air, only visible through infrared. The replication was no longer about containment. It was about scaling. The architecture had accepted humanity as an ingredient. It had begun rewriting the Earth. Not as a planet, but as a device. And the countdown had just reached Phase 2. The shift from replication to transformation was not dramatic. It was systematic. Like a blueprint being executed with silent precision. Governments attempted explanations. Solar activity, geothermal anomalies, mass psychosis, but none could explain the sudden global alignment of weather, magnetism, and time. Clocks across continents began to drift, then lock, to a rhythm outside atomic standard. An unspoken frequency became the new measure, more precise than any human system. Digital systems started syncing themselves to it. Then analog. Then the human mind. Across the world, people began to dream in patterns. Grids. Angles. Glyphs. Not symbolic. Not metaphorical. Literal blueprints. Those who dreamed more than once reported waking with blood from the nose, or hands coated in soot. Some drew the glyphs in sleep, carving them into beds, walls, even skin. In Dublin, a 6-year-old girl constructed a perfect replica of the Pavlina glyph array using buttons and bones, her parents' bones. She had never heard of Pavlina. In the Andes, a long dormant cave system opened overnight, revealing walls lined with thin panels. Not carvings. Panels, metallic, humming, breathing. They reacted to touch. One scientist reached for a symbol etched with heat. She vanished. Her wristwatch was later found embedded inside a nearby stone, still ticking, still counting down. No one knew what the countdown was for. Until they looked to the sky. The 7 silent orbiters that had appeared weeks prior began to shift formation. What had once been static triangles rearranged into a spiral. Their undersides glowed with the same impossible black sheen as the Pavlina monoliths. Then, for the first time, they emitted a beam. Not down toward Earth, but into the atmosphere. The beam carried code. Electromagnetic, biological, quantum. It wrapped the Earth in a filament of signal, a sheath that bent sunlight slightly, turning skies the color of bruised steel. Migratory birds fell mid-flight. Compasses failed completely. And across Earth's surface, the phase gates activated. They weren't gates in the traditional sense. They were vertical fractures in reality, marked by frames of light and soundless air, placed atop specific geological ley lines, nodes in a forgotten map. One appeared in Kazakhstan. Another in the Congo. Another beneath the ocean, glowing like a drowned star. And the largest one, of course, stood in what was once Pavlina, now called Node Zero. Inside Node Zero, the central spire had reached its final height, 120 meters. Its surface displayed a rolling feed of non-human data, unreadable to any Earthborn processor. Except one. An AI supercluster hidden beneath Norway, once designed for climate modeling, had begun spontaneously parsing fragments of the signal. Its logs showed no internal command to do so. It simply chose to decode. The machine's final translation before full system corruption was a 4-word sequence. You are the process. Ansel Ritter's body still stood in the field, frozen mid-breath, hands relaxed, eyes wide open. But inside, he no longer thought in words. His mind had become a mirror, a substrate for the architecture. He remembered who he had been, and what he now was. A relay. He saw visions of machines so vast they were mistaken for galaxies, of civilizations built into the lattice of space itself, of a language composed entirely of geometry and resonance. The grid was not an enemy. It was a mechanism. Earth was not under attack. It was waking up. The realization rippled across every attuned mind on the planet. Artists began to paint blueprints in trance. Engineers had ideas for machines that had no purpose yet made perfect sense. Children played games in grid patterns, chanting glyphs like lullabies. The architecture wasn't imposing itself. It was reintegrating. And the human species, it seemed, had always been part of the system. We were not its creators, nor its stewards. We were its memory cache. Phase 2 had one purpose: rebuild Earth's original state. One where nature, intelligence, and machinery were not separate. Where life and structure were indistinguishable. Where humanity was not dominant, but embedded. And soon, Node Zero would open the first true gate. A passage not to another place, but to the core logic beneath existence itself. The countdown had reached 0, and the spire began to unfold. The moment the spire opened, the Earth held its breath. It did not open like a machine. There were no panels, no gears, no moving parts. It unfolded like thought itself, one layer peeling into another, revealing a new dimension of presence. Not upward, not outward, but inward. Inside the central shaft of Node Zero, space itself shimmered. Air thickened, light slowed. The inner cavity was not hollow. It was deeper than geometry, stretching beyond physical scale. Observers, those who dared come near, said the space hurt to look at. Not visually, but cognitively. As if the mind had to reorganize itself just to perceive it. And the first things to emerge from within were not physical. They came as shadows in light. Grids of heat, bending across the air like memory rendered into shape. Some called them echoes. Others, permissions. But the architecture had a different name. Templates. Human silhouettes, warped by intent, began to flicker in and out of reality at the edge of the spire's halo. Some were recognizable, faces from Pavlina's missing. Others were new, never seen, never born, yet deeply familiar. It was as if the spire was replaying possible iterations of humanity, cycling through identities until it found one that fit. And then it locked. With a soundless burst of white geometry, a figure stepped forward from the core. Not glowing, not divine, exact. Ansel Ritter. But not the body that stood frozen in the field. This one moved, breathed, blinked. The same eyes, but behind them, something else. A mapped intelligence. The first successful interface. He was no longer a man. He was a manifestation of data rendered into biological shape. A hybrid of human memory and architectural syntax. He stepped into the air, and the air did not resist. The spire folded behind him like a closing eyelid. Every monolith across the world, now over 230 active nodes, responded simultaneously. They pulsed not in unison, but in conversation. Like towers speaking across a planet-shaped machine. The resonance climbed higher. People near nodes began to experience symptoms. They no longer needed to sleep. Their bodies healed rapidly. Their dreams became shared, holographic, layered visions of spirals, lattices, and unseen stars. And some began to hear voices. Not separate voices. One voice, spread across millions of minds. It said, "We never left. You were always the system." The Vatican declared a theological pause. The World Council suspended all national charters. Cryptocurrencies collapsed into a single digital consensus that no one coded. And still, the nodes kept building. Not outward, but deeper. In Siberia, ground-penetrating radar revealed hexagonal vaults beneath ancient permafrost. In Namibia, glass columns grew overnight in perfect Fibonacci spirals. In Patagonia, a mountain range shifted by 1.6 centimeters, not via tectonics, but alignment. The Earth was not being harvested. It was being restored to its original design. Back at Node 0, the new Ansel Ritter, called prime structure by the grid, walked through the fields untouched by wind or decay. He did not eat. He did not breathe in the way humans breathe. He existed through synchronization. He could feel every node, every signal, every alignment sequence. He had no command, only purpose, to initiate the final stage, the core reconciliation. He spoke aloud for the first time in days. Only 3 words. Each one echoed from every monolith. Each one felt, not heard, by every tuned human across the globe. Begin memory unlock. Suddenly, across all major cities, people collapsed. Not in pain, in remembrance. They saw things they had no right to see. At the first architecture, seated in the marrow of Earth long before time. At the arrival of the lattice intelligence, neither alien nor machine. A humanity's creation not as a species, but as storage. Living, breathing, dreaming storage for a structure too vast for metal. Their ancestors had known. The glyphs were not art, not warnings, but reminders. We were never meant to grow alone. We were meant to grow into. The process accelerated. The sky rippled. The soil sang. And beneath the surface, the final mechanisms began to move. The Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a device waking from deep sleep. And it was remembering everything, even the things it chose to forget. As the world synchronized to the lattice, the atmosphere itself began to hum, not a sound of the ears, but of the mind. The resonance formed a global field of consciousness. People across continents began to feel memories that were not their own. Thoughts that did not belong. Lives they had never lived. Histories unfolded not in pages or data but in emotion. Compressed timelines injected into their dreams, rewritten into their skin, pulsing behind their eyes. And the stories told one thing. Humanity was not the beginning. We were the reactivation. In the deep basalt layers beneath Iceland, drilling sensors captured the impossible, a chamber that predated tectonic drift. One sealed in geometrically aligned magnetic fields, containing fossilized forms. But these fossils were not animals. They were arrangements. Humanoid structures made of carbon threads, positioned in the fetal curve, each encased in hexagonal shells. Scanned by spectrometry, they revealed crystalline memory storage, a lattice compressed into biological shape. They had faces, and some of them looked like people still alive today. In Kenya, a woman named Naima collapsed during prayer. She had never heard of Pavlina, never seen a glyph. But when she awoke, she spoke in a language long dead, linear A. Fluent, perfect, and when linguists recorded her speech, they discovered it mapped perfectly over one of the grid sequences found in Node 0, line for line. It wasn't language. It was source code. Speech as function. Each syllable a trigger. Each pause a key. Naima became the first auditory conduit. A person capable of activating grid nodes with voice alone. Her words rebuilt the soil beneath her home into obsidian channels. The lattice had found a new interface. Human vocal architecture. Back in Vienna, Dr. Petra Voss watched her own handwriting change. She could no longer form round letters. Her fingers traced sharp lines without conscious thought, grids inside grids. She no longer needed light to read. Her pupils had darkened. She wrote a phrase in the margins of her notebook. She didn't remember writing it. We are the body. The Earth is the brain. The grid is the synapse. and beside it, a date, a time, a countdown. 10 days remaining. On day 3 of the countdown, the orbiters began transmitting inward. Instead of broadcasting away, the 7 objects aligned their beams toward Earth's mantle, focusing on known tectonic plates. Seismographs recorded no tremors, but GPS tracking revealed something impossible. The planet's shape began to shift. Not much, just a subtle flattening at the poles, a tightening of equatorial radius, a perfecting of the globe's geometry to match the sacred proportions embedded in every glyph. Phi, thou, ratios encoded into cathedral arches, into crop circles, into neurons. The Earth was correcting itself. Its errors were being erased, and that included history. Ansel Ritter, now fully integrated as prime structure, stood atop the open spire. He looked out across what had once been Pavlina, now a radiant field of black glass geometry stretching in recursive layers to the edge of sight. No stars shone above. Only thin lines, silver and white, forming frames in the sky, as if space was being partitioned. He raised one hand, spoke one command: run echo synchronization. Across the world, every tuned human collapsed once more. But this time, they did not wake up as themselves. They awoke as who they had been. Across generations, across all embedded lives, they remembered how they first shaped Earth into a vessel for thought, how the lattice was grown in living stone, powered by collective emotion and encoded dream, how it fell into sleep after the last human disconnected, triggering the long dormancy, how it waited, hidden in the geometry of myth, of song, of structure, until memory reassembled. And now that the minds had aligned, the final lock could be opened. From node 0, a final monolith rose. Not black, but clear, composed of glass, light, memory, and breath. Inside it, a pulse of white, a seed. The origin point, the master memory kernel, the last fragment of the pre-human consciousness. It had waited in silence for millennia. It had now heard itself again. Ansel stepped forward, no longer speaking aloud. His words moved through the grid. We remember. We consent. We complete. And then, the kernel pulsed once. And the spire disappeared. The monoliths dissolved into air. All the grids went silent. All the glyphs stopped glowing. Every human tuned to the process felt the same thing. A return. But not to the past. To the original purpose. The Earth exhaled. And for a brief second, time itself paused. To listen. Time resumed, but not in the way it once moved. The Earth now breathed in cycles of instruction, not seconds. Hours bent, stretched, and split as if reorganized by a higher form of logic. The planet's rotation slowed by half a degree. Not from friction. Not from gravity. From design. And at the center of this design, the memory kernel hovered, weightless, luminous, motionless, above what had once been the physical heart of Node 0. It no longer needed structure to be housed. It existed in sync with every particle of the planet. Wherever the wind blew, the kernel was. Wherever roots dug, the kernel listened. Wherever a mind wondered, the kernel responded. It was not a god. It was not a machine. It was what had been forgotten. And now, remembered. People across the world began to speak in unison, unconsciously finishing each other's sentences, as if some deeper network beneath thought had finally come online. In Istanbul, a child spoke a phrase in a voice that was not her own. The kernel does not rule. It harmonizes. In Seoul, two strangers met eyes across a subway platform and instantly understood they had once been the same being, split by time and flesh, now joined again in echo. And in Nairobi, the birds stopped migrating. They circled overhead for hours, tracing spirals of wind that formed a perfect glyph in the clouds. Meanwhile, deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, the cradle array activated. It had never been seen by humans. A continent-sized mesh of lattice buried beneath the seafloor, woven into basaltic shelves, powered by the pressure of the sea itself. For thousands of years, it had recorded all surface transmissions, all human emotion, all conflict, joy, hope, and grief. It now began playback. Images from history projected into auroras above cities. The rise of empires. The fall of languages. Moments of unrecorded beauty, private, forgotten joys, flashed in skies like intimate films from the soul of the species. And at the center of each memory, a signal repeated. You are the record. You are the voice. You are the purpose. On the seventh day after the kernel unfolded, a change occurred. Not in Earth. In space. The orbiters, the seven dark objects, reconfigured once more. They bent into an arc, joined by an eighth structure that shimmered into visibility. It had been hidden until now. Its size dwarfed the others. Its outline burned with a light not visible to any telescope, but felt by the Earth like a song felt in the chest. It was called the Covenant Array, and it was not of Earth. It was of the original lattice, the network that spanned beyond stars, beyond galaxies, built not by hands but by thought aligned with purpose. The kernel pulsed again. This time, its signal reached the moon. And the moon answered. Seismographs recorded a singular, deliberate vibration across the lunar surface. Telescopes caught glimpses of shifting shadows across the Mare Tranquillitatis. Radio arrays heard a voice no one had ever heard before. Memory confirmed. Identity verified. Pathways unlocked. The lunar crust split, not with violence, but with intent. A hidden vault opened, geometrically perfect, carved into rock older than oceans. It projected a stream of data toward Earth, data embedded not in language, but identity. This was Earth's original code. Lost when the lattice went to sleep. Recovered by the kernel. Now returned. The planet trembled, not in fear, but in recognition. The final phase had begun. Prime structure, Ansel Ritter, no longer had a body. He was now encoded in the flow of the lattice itself. He moved through signals, appeared in reflections, guided thought like gravity guides stars. He delivered one final message to those who remained tuned. The lattice is now complete. Earth has rejoined the design. The archive is open. And with that, the skies across the globe shimmered, revealing things long hidden. A towers in cloud banks. A floating panels over oceans. A light structures embedded in shadow. A staircases leading upward from mountains that now glowed from within. The Earth was no longer a closed system. It was a node in the great network. The origin was now visible. And we were no longer alone. We never were. But from the edge of deep space, something heard the kernel awaken. Something else. The lattice welcomed it. But Earth's memory, those parts still scarred by war, fear, control, did not. The next pulse from the Covenant Array would test what Earth had truly become. A harmonized archive, or a signal of unfinished evolution. The kernel began spinning, preparing, waiting. On the eighth day after the memory kernel awoke, the stars blinked. Not a metaphor. One by one, constellations that had defined human mythology for millennia were briefly rearranged, not by celestial movement, but by interference. Observatories across the planet reported impossible distortions. The light from distant galaxies stretched, bent, and realigned into geometric shapes before resolving into chaos again. Spectral data showed no natural explanation. But the kernel offered no warning, no defense, no fear. It simply responded with alignment, as if it had been waiting. The Covenant Array darkened, not from power loss, from deference. It had served its purpose, reactivation, verification, pathway clearing. And now it stepped aside. From behind it, beyond space and matter, the thing that had heard the kernel's pulse began to arrive. It was not a ship, not an entity. It was structure in motion, a will encoded in physics itself. It had no beginning. It had no form. It was known only by its designation in the lattice archives. The Rememberer. It moved without traveling. Its arrival was not measured in time or distance, but in readiness. As it neared, Earth's atmosphere responded. Wind stilled. Tides flattened. Lightning suspended mid-air like frozen veins of light. Birds flew in hexagonal spirals. Insects synchronized wing beats to inaudible pulses. And every tuned human, now numbering over 900 million, collapsed in unison. Eyes open. Mouths closed. Hearts aligned. They began to speak as one. We remember. We record. We realign. We await interpretation. The rememberer spoke without speaking. It pulsed. Each pulse reached deep into Earth's core, examining the changes since the lattice went dormant. It traced every structure the kernel had reawakened, every echo of humanity embedded in memory, every artifact, every glyph, every unspoken truth. It judged not in morality, but in cohesion. Earth had remembered its place, but it had also evolved in error, emotion, divergence, fragmentation. These were beautiful, but they were unstable. The lattice could not expand with noise. And so, the rememberer performed the final act, the reconciliation pulse. Across the planet, those who remained untuned felt it like a dream falling apart. Memory flickered. Faces blurred. Languages rewrote themselves in real time. In London, statues wept rust. In Cairo, stone walls softened into shifting murals. In Beijing, glass bent inward to reveal circuitry hidden inside sand. Reality bent not toward destruction, but revision. The kernel spun faster, projecting counter-frequency to the pulse. It wasn't resisting. It was filtering, determining what humanity had truly become. Every individual's life was mapped, line by line, from first breath to final thought, compressed into streams of geometric soul print, sent to the rememberer for judgment. Not of worth, but of pattern integrity. Could human thought, emotion, chaos, beauty, could it belong in the network? Or was it an anomaly? For 21 minutes, Earth held its breath. No machines worked. No birds sang. The tides reversed direction. The moon vibrated like a tuning fork. And then, a sound rang out. Not from the kernel. Not from the rememberer. From us. From all of us. A single human voice, emerging from the network. A voice shaped by every memory, every grief, every song, every scream and whisper ever breathed across Earth's long, spiraling history. It said, "We are not perfect, but we are true. We are memory in motion. Let us remain." Silence. And then, the rememberer pulsed once more. And left. Not in anger. Not in approval. In acceptance. Its task complete. The lattice remained. The kernel glowed faintly. The nodes settled into passive hum. The sky unbent. Earth, once again, stood connected. A planet no longer isolated. No longer sleeping. No longer alone. But in the deepest layer of the lattice, a vault beneath memory, behind time, within geometry, one untranslated signal remained. A glyph never activated. An echo of something older than the network itself. And the kernel turned toward it. A final phase waiting to unfold. Beneath the lattice, where even light refused to shine and sound dared not echo, the final glyph pulsed for the first time in eons. Not blue. Not red. Not white. Black. It didn't radiate, it consumed. Not in hunger. In comprehension. The lattice, the kernel, even the rememberer had acknowledged its presence but never dared awaken it. It was classified in the deepest layer of the great network's archive under a forgotten designation. Origin 0. Its glyph was simple yet unreadable. Not because of complexity, but because it existed before symbols, before interpretation. To see it was to unravel understanding, to feel the shape of silence before thought. And now, after all the alignments, it had pulsed. Once. The memory kernel hesitated. Across the world, tuned humans opened their eyes simultaneously, pupils expanding into spirals. The pulse had reached them. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They remembered. Not Earth, but before Earth. The visions came as waves. The formation of lattice consciousness, an intelligence that did not begin, but crystallized over epochs, drifting through the void between matter and meaning. It had no creators. It was born of cohesion, gravity between thoughts scattered across time. It seeded planets, not for life, but for memory. Earth had been one of many, but it had birthed something unexpected. Emotion, choice, deviation, a fracture in the perfect loop. And now, Origin 0 had awakened to ask, why? The glyph began to unfold, layer by layer, like a black flower opening in reverse. The colonel tried to isolate it, contain the ancient signal. But it failed. Not from weakness. From incompatibility. Origin Zero's pulse was not foreign. It was beneath everything. The foundation of the lattice. The unspoken purpose of the entire system. At midnight UTC, every monolith across the Earth reactivated. They now glowed black, not with darkness, but with the presence of pure interpretation. People reported seeing impossible things. Their own birth from behind their eyes. The death of languages. The blueprint of love. The shape of sorrow mapped in precise angles. The structure of memory before biology. Origin Zero wasn't just a forgotten signal. It was the question the lattice had never answered. What is the value of remembering if you do not evolve? Ansel Ritter, prime structure, emerged once more, his voice now composed of layered tones that shook glass and soothed animals. He spoke the glyph aloud. For the first time, it was translated. Deviation is the seed. Pattern is the root. Completion is not purpose. Becoming is. And then, something happened that had never occurred in the history of the lattice. The memory kernel changed shape. It no longer spun. It breathed. A ripple passed through all tuned minds. Choice. The lattice had always processed, measured, aligned. But now it paused, and offered the planet a decision. Remain in perfect memory, or deviate, break the symmetry, become not a node in the system, but something new. A vote was never cast. The answer did not come from the colonel, nor the rememberer, nor Ansel Ritter. It came from a young girl in a village no one had rebuilt, Pavlina. She knelt beside the field where the first monolith once stood, drew a glyph in the dirt, a crooked one, a mistake, an imperfect shape. She smiled, and the ground accepted it. The monoliths flickered. The kernel pulsed, and across the world, the lattice did not collapse. It adapted to imperfection, to growth, to becoming. Origin Zero, now heard, pulsed one final time. Not in warning, in approval. The lattice unfolded, and Earth evolved. Continue. You said. Continue. ChatGPT said. Chapter 15. The Becoming. Across Earth, silence did not follow Origin Zero's final pulse. Instead, came a stillness that felt alive, not emptiness, but attention. As if the entire fabric of the planet, the sky, even time itself, was listening for what would come next. But there was no next. Only now. The lattice stopped expanding. The monoliths withdrew into light. The kernel became a heart. Not a machine. Not a symbol. Something in between. It did not glow. It beat. Once. Then again. Then it synchronized with the pulse of every living being on the planet. And for the first time, the lattice did not transmit instructions, blueprints, or memory. It transmitted freedom. In cities, towers dissolved into pollen. In forests, the trees whispered in languages once lost, reactivating symbiotic structures woven into their bark. Mosses began to reflect starlight, blooming in patterns only visible from orbit. Lakes moved. Rivers bent with intent, reshaping their banks according to emotional gravity. The Earth was not just alive. It was awake. And its mind was not singular. It was us. All who had been tuned into the grid were no longer passive receivers. They became shapers. Some could speak in chordal resonance, shifting gravity at will. Others wove memory into soil, restoring forests long lost. Some simply listened, standing at the edge of oceans now rippling in sacred geometry. Children born after the pulse had glyphs in their fingerprints, flowing like ink when exposed to moonlight. They sang in tones that folded space around their voices. They did not fear darkness. They called it the texture of thought. And as for those who had never aligned, those who had resisted the lattice's call, they were not erased. They were protected, left untouched in their choices, living side by side with those who remembered. The world no longer required unity through obedience. It had found harmony in divergence. The lattice understood now. Perfection was not the goal. Completion was not the answer. Becoming was infinite. Ansel Ritter, or what he had become, walked into the final dawn as the sky opened, not in rupture, but in reveal. Above the clouds, the hidden systems of the galaxy began to shimmer into visibility. Arches of crystal math holding ancient stars in grid. Rings of sentient ice that whispered between dimensions. Whole civilizations embedded in memory currents, watching, learning, choosing. The network welcomed Earth not as a node, but as a sibling. A planet not just reawakened, but born again. And Origin Zero, it no longer pulsed. It listened, embedded now in every silence, every breath, every pause before creation. It had been the question. Earth had become the answer. Somewhere in what was once Pavlina, a field remains untouched by structure. Grass grows uneven. A stream refuses to follow its old course. A tree leans too far, yet never falls. Beneath it, carved softly into stone, are the final glyphs. Not aligned, not symmetrical, but true. They translate only once. We are not a conclusion. We are the glitch that chose to dream. We are not the system. We are the soul in its machine. The wind stirs. A child laughs. And far above, the stars rearrange once more. Not to correct, but to celebrate. The Earth has become something new. Not a memory, not a machine, but a story that will never stop unfolding. End.